that gate down. We have 90 guests coming in.
That's what the HOA president yelled at her contractor. She was standing in front of a highway-grade hydraulic barricade. The Idaho Transportation Department had installed it across my private ranch road overnight. I watched from a logging trail above as her caravan jammed up like a bad checkout line. 80 vehicles, 12 boat trailers, 2 food trucks, a jazz duo wedged into the bed of a Ford Maverick. She'd been turning my grandfather's gravel road into her free lakeshore tour route for 3 summers. She'd been billing customers for exclusive private lake access she had no right to sell. She didn't know the gate had been delivered on a flatbed at midnight. She didn't know the Idaho State Police were watching her contractor on a screen in Coeur d'Alene. So I didn't drive down. I didn't shout. I tipped my coffee and let the steel finish the conversation. Tell me below, would you have stopped her then, or let the gate do the talking? My name is Tate Brennan, and I live on the backside of Bottle Bay in Bonner County, Idaho, about a 40-minute drive south of Sandpoint. The property is 180 acres of mixed pine and Douglas fir, sloping east toward Lake Pend Oreille. My grandfather Asa Brennan bought the parcel in 1956 with a cash settlement from a logging accident that took his left hand. He cut the road himself with a borrowed bulldozer in 1958 and recorded it with the Bonner County Recorder as a private agricultural easement, in his own name, in his own handwriting. That road is the only paved and gravel access to a quarter-mile of east-facing lakeshore that the family has owned since the Truman administration. I spent 30 years as a senior engineer for the Idaho Transportation Department. I specialized in rural roadway design and right-of-way certification. My corner of public works was the unglamorous one: easements, encroachments, and what to do when a county road has been quietly absorbed into somebody's pasture. I know how a road becomes a road. I also know how it stops being one. I retired 4 years ago to take over the Brennan place from my father after his stroke. The property is a Christmas tree farm in the front 60 acres. Douglas fir, Fraser fir, a row of white pine my father planted for our wedding. There are 8 boarded horses in the middle paddock and 4 llamas in the back paddock that my late wife Linnea adored. Linnea died 5 years ago of pancreatic cancer. 11 months from her diagnosis to the morning I sat with her at Sacred Heart in Spokane and held her hand until it was over. The llamas were her project. I keep them because she would have wanted me to. I keep the trees because my father would have wanted me to. I keep the horses because my daughter Sloan wanted me to. Sloan is 32 now. She lives in Spokane with her husband and works as an environmental attorney for a firm that does most of the public lands litigation in the Idaho Panhandle. She drives out every other Sunday with 2 pies and a folder of paperwork she is convinced I have not yet filed correctly. She is usually right. The trouble started the spring after they finished building Pend Oreille Pines Estates. Pend Oreille Pines Estates is a 46-lot waterfront subdivision on a finger of lakeshore that had been a working timber tract since the 1920s. The land was sold in 2021 to a Spokane outfit called Larkspur Heritage Development. By the summer of 2022, the lots were graded and the Lakeview homes were under roof. A brand new HOA was already busy passing rules about boathouse colors and dock lighting. The first letter showed up in my mailbox in May 2023. Cream paper, a watercolor sketch of a lake at sunset, and the elegant signature of Madam President, Bridget Vanderhook. The letter was addressed, "Dear Neighbor." It described, in friendly language, a shared road maintenance program that the HOA wanted to launch in cooperation with the owner of the Lakeshore Access Spur. It asked me to consider contributing $400 a year to preserve the rural character of the joint roadway. I had never met Bridget Vanderhook. I had never agreed to anything. The roadway was not joint. I drove my truck down to the head of the road that afternoon to see what she was talking about. Stuck into the soft dirt at the base of my mailbox post was a hand-painted sign on cedar plank. It read, "Poe Pines Estates, Public Lake Access. Keep right." The sign was not on her property. It was not on county right-of-way. It was on mine, 3 feet inside the south boundary of the recorded Brennan easement. I pulled the sign out of the dirt with one hand and threw it in the bed of the truck. Big mistake. People like Bridget Vanderhook take silence as permission. By the time the second letter arrived, she had already ordered the brochures. The brochure showed up in early June. It was a glossy half-page insert in a regional lake life magazine called Pend Oreille Living. The insert advertised the new Spokane-based outfit called Pend Oreille Premier Experiences, owned and operated by Bridget Vanderhook. The brochure offered 2-hour sunset cruises at $95 per person. It offered 4-hour wakeboard charters at $340 per group. It included a Sunday wine and wakes package, with shoreside catering on a private lakeshore deck with deeded access from Bottle Bay Road. There is no deeded access from Bottle Bay Road. There is my road. By the second weekend in June, I was counting trucks down the gravel like I was counting telemetry data on an old DOT job. 21 vehicles Saturday, 26 Sunday, 11 boats on trailers, 2 large white passenger vans with Pond Array Premier Experiences vinyl on the side panels. A few of the drivers waved at me as they came past my front gate. Most did not look at me at all. Tuesday morning, I called the HOA office. Bridget Vanderhook answered on the second ring with a voice that sounded like she was running for office. Penderay Pines, Bridget speaking. Isn't it a beautiful day? I told her my name. I told her about the sign she had put on my mailbox post. I told her about the brochure I had read. I told her about the 70 vehicles I had counted using my private agricultural easement over a single weekend. There was a long, unbothered pause. Mr. Brennan, that road has been used by lake visitors for 35 years. We have what's called a prescriptive easement. I'd be happy to email you the relevant statute. I told her I was familiar with the relevant statute. I told her the road had been recorded as a private easement by my grandfather in 1958. I told her the only people who had used the road for 35 years were members of my family, plus the Bonner County propane truck, the rural mail carrier, and 3 contractors I had hired personally. I told her brochure was advertising access she did not have and could not legally sell. The unbothered pause came back. Mr. Brennan, I want to be a good neighbor, but the homeowners at Pond Array Pines have rights too. If you'd like to attend our next board meeting, we can discuss adding the spur to our community easement portfolio. Adding the spur to your what? Our easement portfolio. We have a process for absorbing private roads that have become integral to community function. I sat very still in the kitchen. I watched the second hand on the clock above the stove move 3 times. Mrs. Vanderhook, I worked for the Idaho Transportation Department for 30 years. There is no such thing as an HOA easement portfolio. There is no such thing as the absorption of a private road by a community vote. What you are describing does not exist. The pause came back, this time shorter and harder. Mr. Brennan, the board meets on the second Tuesday of every month. I would encourage you to come. She hung up. I drove out to the head of the road. There were 2 new signs that hadn't been there Sunday. The first read, Poe Pines, Lake Access, Residents and Guests. The second was a small QR code sign that read, Scan to book your lake experience. I took photographs of both signs with the date and GPS metadata. Then I drove the 7 miles into Sandpoint to the office of the only attorney in Bonner County I had ever truly trusted. Her name was Adele Pruitt. She had drafted my grandfather's will, my father's will, and my own. Adele read the photographs. She read Bridget's letter. She read the brochure I had pulled off the rack at the gas station. Tate, she said, do you remember Quentin Halverson from the department? I did. Quentin Halverson had been my second in command on the Rural Roads desk for 11 years. He was now the District 1 ITD engineer in charge of the Idaho Panhandle. Call him this afternoon. Ask him whether the Idaho Transportation Department has any interest in a real estate company quietly converting a private agricultural easement into a commercial tour route. I called him from the parking lot. He listened the way only an old colleague listens. Then he was quiet for a moment. Tate, he said, give me 48 hours. I want to bring some people. Quentin Halverson did not need 48 hours. He was at my front porch by 8 in the morning the next day, in his ITD truck, with 2 other people I had not expected. The first was Annika Borgen, a sergeant with the Idaho State Police's White-Collar Crimes Division, based out of Coeur d'Alene. The second was a slender woman in field clothes named Marlon Faraday, an investigator with the Idaho Department of Lands. Quentin had brought a thermos of coffee, and the wind had not yet come up off the lake. We sat on the porch for 2 hours. Marlon Faraday looked at the brochure first. Then she looked at me. Mr. Brennan, you understand that the dock Pond Array Pines is using for these tours is on land that is partially owned by the state of Idaho. I had not understood that. I had assumed the HOA owned every inch of waterfront they had built on. They own the upland, Marlon said. They do not own the 17 feet of beach below the high water mark, which under Idaho law belongs to the state. We license that strip. They do not have a license. They have been hosting paid commercial events on state-owned lakeshore for 2 summers without any permits whatsoever. Sergeant Borgen took a long, slow sip of coffee. "Mr. Brennan," she said, "before this is over, your problem is going to be the smallest part of Bridget Vanderhook's problem." By that afternoon, Quentin had filed an internal Idaho Transportation Department review of the unauthorized commercial use of a private agricultural easement. By Wednesday, Sergeant Borgen had opened a parallel investigation. By Thursday morning, Bridget Vanderhook's response arrived in the form of a bulldozer, a yellow Komatsu D39, pulled up to the head of my road at 7:30 in the morning. The operator was a heavy man in a Carhartt jacket with a work order on a clipboard. The work order had been signed by Bridget Vanderhook on Pond Array Pines Estates letterhead. The job was $12,000 of entry widening, gravel apron, and decorative landscape buffer. The work was on the section of road between the lake spur and my front gate. I walked down to meet him with my coffee. His name was Wally Lundgren. Wally had run earth-moving equipment in Bonner County his entire adult life. Wally took one look at my driver's license. He took another look at the photograph of the recorded 1958 easement Adele had given me. He took a third look at the email Quentin had sent the evening before. Wally drove the bulldozer back onto his trailer without breaking ground. Before he left, Wally signed a sworn statement on Sergeant Borgen's letterhead. He also gave us the names of 3 other contractors Bridget had been hiring without owner consent, on 3 other private roads in northern Bonner County. Friday brought the $4,800 invoice for back shared road maintenance fees. Saturday brought 64 vehicles down my road, in spite of the conversation. Sunday brought a paid customer who actually stopped at my front gate. She rolled down her window and asked whether the wakeboard charter was still launching at 1 in the afternoon. She had paid $230 for her ticket. I told her, gently, that there had never been a wakeboard charter, and that I was sorry she had been deceived. She got back in her car, very quietly, and drove the 7 miles back to Sandpoint. Monday I had the cattle guard installed. It was a heavy-duty Powder River steel guard set into a concrete frame at the head of the easement. It was designed to handle 80,000 pounds of axle load and to prevent unauthorized vehicle access. Above it, on a hinged frame, I mounted a temporary swing gate with a locked chain. I posted 3 signs: private agricultural easement, no public access, all trespass will be prosecuted. Tuesday morning, the chain on the gate had been cut. Tuesday evening, the chain on the gate had been cut a second time. It was a different contractor with a different bolt cutter, after I had already replaced it. Wednesday morning, I drove down to find a small backhoe attempting to lift the cattle guard out of the concrete frame. The operator was a man named Dean Kruger. I would later learn Bridget had paid him $1,000 in cash that morning. The job was to remove an unpermitted obstruction blocking community lake access. Dean Kruger was the 3rd contractor in 3 days, who would be giving Sergeant Borgen a sworn statement before sundown. Sloan drove out from Spokane on Saturday with 2 pies, a paralegal named Cole Beaufort, and a banker's box of empty file folders. By the time she finished her first pie, she had already opened a public records request through her firm. The request went to the Bonner County Recorder, the Bonner County Assessor, the Idaho Department of Lands, and the Idaho Secretary of State. She wanted every easement filing, every commercial activity permit application, and every lakeshore lease bearing the name Bridget Vanderhook or Pond Array Premier Experiences. Cole Beaufort started running search strings at the kitchen table, while Sloan briefed me on what she expected to find. "Dad," she said, "if she's running this scheme on your road, she's running it somewhere else too. People like her don't invent these tactics, they reuse them." By Sunday evening, Cole had pulled the deed file on the Pond Array Pines lakeshore parcel. By Monday morning, Sloan had read the recorded easement document that Larkspur Heritage Development had used to close on the parcel. The document claimed a 30-foot private right-of-way across the southern edge of the Brennan property in favor of successor lake access for any future subdivision improvements. The signature on the easement was my father's, Wendell Brennan, dated August 14, 2009. My father had been dead since 2010. He had never signed any such document. The notary who had stamped the page had a commission number issued in Kootenai County, 90 miles south. The commission belonged to a man whose business had been shut down 2 years before the supposed signing date. The fingerprint of the signature itself was a near-perfect match to the signature on Wendell Brennan's death certificate. Somebody had photocopied my dead father's signature off a public document. They had glued it onto a fresh easement. They had recorded it as if he had reached up out of the ground and signed it with his own pen. I sat on the porch with that document in my hands and listened to the lake for a long time. By Tuesday, Cole had identified 2 more lake access HOAs in northern Idaho, where a similar fraudulent easement had been recorded against a neighboring private property. One was on Lake Kokolala. One was on the eastern side of Hayden Lake. Both had been managed during their formative years by the same property management company. Both had subsequently begun selling commercial lake tour packages on land they did not own. Both had been quietly bleeding the original property owners of road maintenance fees, easement encroachment penalties, and intimidation lawsuits for years. The total estimated revenue from the 3 combined operations, by Cole's careful spreadsheet, was somewhere north of $230,000 over 3 summers. None of it had been declared on any state business tax filing. None of it had been licensed by the Idaho Department of Lands. Most of it had been billed through cash, Venmo, and an LLC. The LLC was registered to Bridget Vanderhook's husband Reese in Nevada. Wednesday brought the next move from Bridget. The first was a 46-page complaint filed in Bonner County District Court. It alleged that I had willfully obstructed an established prescriptive easement. It sought an injunction barring me from operating any gate, guard, or sign on the access road. The complaint demanded damages of $150,000 for loss of community amenity value. The second was a smear column in the monthly Pond Array Pines Estates community newsletter, written by Bridget herself, titled, "When a Bad Neighbor Becomes a Real Problem." The column described an unnamed elderly Bottle Bay landowner who had weaponized his road against the community's right to enjoy lake access. It accused him of being mentally unwell, hostile to children, and out of touch with the values of modern lake living. The third was a trespass complaint Bridget had personally filed against me with the Bonner County Sheriff's Office. She alleged that I had threatened her contractor with a firearm. I had not. I do not own one. The complaint's author had not known that. Sergeant Borgen showed up at my house Wednesday evening with the 3 documents in a folder. She sat at my kitchen table. She looked at me across the documents. "Mr. Brennan, she's panicking. She's making mistakes." Sloan poured Sergeant Borgen a fresh cup of coffee. "Sergeant," Sloan said, "let's give her a stage to make a few more." Quentin Halverson came back to my front porch on Friday morning at 6. This time he brought 4 people. The first was Sergeant Annika Borgen of the Idaho State Police, whom I had now come to think of as the calmest person in northern Idaho. The second was Marlon Faraday from the Idaho Department of Lands, who showed up with a binder I would later learn weighed 11 pounds. The third was Special Agent Reagan Tilford, the senior financial crimes investigator at the FBI's Spokane field office. He was in plain clothes. He had the careful eyes of a man who reads paperwork until patterns appear under his fingernails. The fourth was Special Agent Greer Lindstrom of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. By 8 o'clock, my dining room was a federal task force. Sloan made the coffee. Cole Beaufort laid out the documents the way a fisherman lays out a tackle box. Marlon Faraday opened her 11-pound binder. "Mr. Brennan," Marlon said, "the dock at Pond Array Pines was constructed below the ordinary high water mark on land owned by the state of Idaho. They have been operating commercial activity on that dock for 2.5 summers without any of the 4 required state permits. The penalty for unlicensed commercial operation on state lakeshore is $1,250 per day per violation. By my count, on Pond Array Pines alone, Bridget Vanderhook owes the state of Idaho approximately $1,140,000 in accrued penalties." The room was quiet for a moment. Special Agent Tilford set his coffee cup down. "That's the state side," he said. "The federal side is cleaner. We have a forged real estate document recorded across state lines. We have wire fraud through her Venmo and Stripe accounts. We have mail fraud through the printed brochures she's mailed to the Spokane subscriber base of Pond Array Living. And we have a clear pattern of identical scheme across 3 separate HOAs, which gets us into federal conspiracy and into the threshold for organized criminal activity." Greer Lindstrom flipped open a tablet. "On the IRS side, Mrs. Vanderhook has personally received approximately $231,000 in cash and electronic payments since 2022. None of it has been reported on any federal or state tax return. Her husband Reese has received another $68,000 through the Nevada LLC. Combined unreported income across the household exceeds $290,000 over 3 years. That gets us into willful tax evasion territory. Sergeant Borgen leaned back in her chair. The Idaho criminal counts are honestly the smallest part. Forgery in the second degree, recording a fraudulent document, practicing without a real estate license, 2 counts of trespass on private property, conspiracy, false police report against Mr. Brennan. Quentin Halverson, my old colleague, looked at me across the table. He had been quiet for most of the morning. I knew that look from 25 years of working beside him. "Tate," he said, "we need her to do it again, on a scale she's never tried before, with every agency present and every camera rolling. If she escalates the way she has been escalating, the Saturday she does it will be the last Saturday she sees the lake." Special Agent Tilford set down his coffee a second time. "Mr. Brennan, we have everything we need to indict her today, but Quentin and Sergeant Borgen and I would like to give her one more chance. We want her to incriminate herself in front of every possible witness." Sloan was already smiling. "Dad," she said, "I think it's time we set up a Saturday." I looked around my dining room at the 7 of them. I looked at the photograph of Linnea on the bookshelf behind Reagan Tilford's head. "Folks," I said, "let's set the table for Saturday." The next 2 weeks turned my front porch into a coordinated quietness. Quentin Halverson worked his side of the system with the patience of an engineer who has filed too many right-of-way certifications to be in a hurry. He arranged for the District 1 ITD shop to fabricate a custom hydraulic barricade gate. It was the same kind of yellow and black emergency gate the department uses to close mountain passes during avalanche events. The gate would be 28 feet wide and 2 feet thick at the barrier rail. It would be hydraulically controlled from a small pad mounted on a power pole. It would stop a fully loaded log truck at 25 miles an hour without flexing. Quentin also arranged for a secondary spike strip and concrete bollard system to be installed 200 feet behind the main gate. The two together would form what he called, in his quiet way, a containment zone. Sloan handled the legal misdirection. She filed a thick procedural answer to Bridget's prescriptive easement complaint. It was full of motions for extension, requests for production of documents, and demands for depositions. None of those depositions would need to be scheduled for at least 60 days. The answer was designed to do one thing. It was designed to make Bridget Vanderhook believe she had a long, slow legal fight ahead of her. She would think she had time to keep running her commercial tours through the summer while her attorneys argued in court. Sloan signed the answer with a flourish that would have made her mother laugh. Special Agent Tilford handled the federal coordination. By the second Wednesday, his Spokane field office had wiretap warrants on 3 of Bridget's phones. They had financial seizure orders on her LLC accounts. They had a coordinated takedown plan that would activate on the agency's command. Reagan Tilford had not been this excited about a case in years. He told me over coffee on my porch that the last time was a Coeur d'Alene mortgage fraud ring in 2019. He thanked me twice for the paperwork. Marlon Faraday handled the bait. Marlon had a college roommate from her University of Idaho days, who now worked as a lifestyle reporter at Pond Array Living, the same magazine that had run Bridget's brochure inserts. Marlon's friend casually mentioned to Bridget at a Sandpoint Gallery opening that summer's biggest waterfront opportunity was about to open up. The magazine had heard a rumor. The cantankerous old engineer who owned the gravel road on Bottle Bay was going to be in Spokane the whole weekend of August 17th. He'd be there for his daughter's Bar Association induction ceremony. The bait was bourbon-aged. Bridget bit hard. By the following Tuesday, the Pond Array Pines Estates website was advertising a Pond Array Sunset Sail Festival for Saturday, August 17th. Catered Italian dinner on the dock, a 4-piece live band, a vintage Chris Craft showcase, 12 sail charters running on a rotating schedule. Tickets were $320 per couple, capped at 145 guests. Sold out within 48 hours. I called Pippa Whitford on Thursday. Pippa was the assignment editor at Creme 2 in Spokane. I had known her since she had covered the Highway 95 reconstruction project I ran in 2009. Pippa listened to me describe what was likely to happen on my private road on Saturday. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she was quiet for 2 seconds. "Tate," she said, "I'll bring 2 trucks myself." The ITD crew arrived at my front gate at 9:45 Friday night. They came with a flatbed semi, 2 service vehicles, a portable hydraulic press, a small bobcat, and a 6-man install team in reflective vests. They worked under battery-powered work lights through the rain that came in off the lake at 11. By 2 in the morning, the new highway-grade barricade was set in concrete at the head of my road. The bollard system was installed 200 feet behind it. Quentin Halverson signed off on the install at 3. The crew left their lights on for 15 minutes after they pulled out. I sat on the porch and watched the road, listened to the rain, and missed Linnea. By 6 the next morning, the rain had stopped. The first vehicle of Bridget Vanderhook's caravan turned onto Bottle Bay Road at 8:52. Saturday morning came up cool and clear. The lake fog burned off the surface of Bottle Bay like steam off a coffee cup. I was in my pickup truck 200 yards above the road, on a logging trail my grandfather had cut in 1962. 3 browser tabs were open on a tablet, showing the live feed from the gate cameras. Sergeant Borgen's unmarked white Tahoe was parked at the abandoned Forest Service spur a quarter-mile north. Special Agent Tilford and Special Agent Lindstrom were inside an FBI Suburban, tucked into the cedars at the South Fork. Quentin Halverson and Marlon Faraday were inside the ITD service truck, 30 yards behind my barricade. Pippa Whitford had a satellite truck inside Nora Esterhouse's hayshed across the county line. Nora had baked muffins. The first vehicle to come up the road was a white Ford Expedition with 2 Spokane couples in their 40s. They reached the new gate at 9:03, pulled to a polite stop, and rolled down the window to read the signs. The signs were not subtle. Private agricultural easement, no public access, road closed by order of owner, barricade operated by Idaho Transportation Department, emergency vehicles only. The driver of the Ford Expedition pulled out a phone. He took a photograph. He turned the SUV around and drove back down Bottle Bay Road. He had the calm of a man who had paid $320 for the wrong kind of weekend. Behind him came the next 8 vehicles in less than 9 minutes. Each one stopped at the barricade. Each one read the signs. Most of them turned around. 3 of them stayed. They parked along the shoulder, climbed out of their cars, and stood in the road talking to each other. They had the confused energy of people trying to decide if they had been scammed. At 9:27, Bridget Vanderhook's pearl white Range Rover came around the bend. She had 3 other vehicles behind her. The Cadillac Escalade carrying her husband Reese, the lead vehicle for the catering company, a refrigerated Sprinter van, and a small flatbed pulling a 4-piece band's equipment trailer. Bridget got out of the Range Rover. She had on a white linen dress, gold sandals, oversized sunglasses, and a clipboard. She walked up to the barricade with the confidence of a woman who had not yet read the signs. She read the signs. She took 2 steps back. Then she walked up to the barricade and tried, with both hands, to lift the steel rail manually. She might as well have tried to lift the dock at the Bottle Bay Marina with her shoulders. The rail did not move. Her hands came away orange with safety paint. The cameras caught her wiping her hands on the white linen. Bridget pulled out her phone. She made a call. The audio of that call was already being captured by a federal wiretap and would later be played in open court. She was calling a contractor named Phil Hauser, a part-time mobile welder who ran a small 1-truck cutting operation out of Coquilala. "Phil, how fast can you get to the head of Bottle Bay Road with your plasma cutter?" Phil Hauser was 42 minutes out on his other job in Spirit Lake. He told Bridget he could be there in an hour for $1,500 cash up front. Bridget told him to get in the truck. While Phil was driving, Bridget tried 4 other locksmiths and 3 other welders. 2 declined the job after she described the location. 1 quoted her $3,000 and refused to come without a property owner's signed authorization. The 4th simply hung up. Bridget walked back to the Range Rover. She paced. She made another call, this one to her husband Reese. He was sitting in the Escalade with the air conditioning on. He told her, in slow, patient sentences, that she should let it go and refund the guests. She did not let it go. By 9:55, 16 vehicles had stacked up at the barricade. The catering Sprinter van had pulled around to a wider spot to park. The band trailer had popped its tailgate to keep the equipment from baking. 3 couples in summer dress were standing along the shoulder, photographing the barricade like it was an art installation. A 6-year-old girl in a pink life vest was on the phone with her grandmother in Coeur d'Alene, asking why the boat lady was crying. Phil Hauser's truck turned the corner onto Bottle Bay Road at 10:06. He was driving very slowly. I closed the laptop. I took one last sip of coffee. I started the truck. Phil Hauser pulled his Chevy work truck up to the barricade and stepped out into the gravel. He had the cautious posture of a man who had already worked too many borderline jobs in his career. His truck bed held a Hypertherm PowerMax 105 plasma cutter, a small Honda generator, 2 coils of grounding cable, a face shield, and a leather welding apron. Phil Hauser was good at what he did. He was not, by any honest accounting, a brave man. Bridget Vanderhook had her clipboard out before he was through the truck door. "Phil, right here. Cut the rail at both pivot brackets. I need this open in 20 minutes. Phil Hauser looked at the barricade. He looked at the orange and black Idaho Transportation Department decal stamped across the side of the hydraulic pad. He looked at the emergency operation only sign, mounted 6 feet above the rail. "Ma'am, is this an ITD installation?" "It is on my road." "Ma'am, the decal says it's an Idaho Transportation Department installation." "It is on my access road, Phil. I am the property manager. I have authorization." Phil looked at the barricade for another full 10 seconds. "Ma'am, I need to see something signed by ITD before I cut into a state-installed barrier." "Phil, I am paying you $1,500 in cash. Cut the rail." Phil pulled out his own phone. He stepped 15 feet away from Bridget and called the District 1 ITD office in Coeur d'Alene. A receptionist answered. She transferred him to Quentin Halverson's line. Quentin's line rang once. It was picked up by a federal recording device. Then it was answered by Quentin himself. Quentin happened to be standing 30 yards behind Phil at that exact moment, with a clipboard of his own and a phone Bluetooth paired to his patrol vehicle. Phil's phone said one thing in Quentin's polite engineer voice. "Sir, that is an active Idaho Transportation Department installation. Cutting it without a department-issued authorization is a Class C felony under Idaho Code 18-7012. I would advise you to set down your equipment and wait." Phil Hauser set down his equipment. He walked back to Bridget, slowly, with both hands raised as if to calm an animal. "Ma'am, I cannot do this job." Bridget's face did the thing I would later learn she did before every bad decision of her professional life. The skin around her eyes went tight. Her lips disappeared into a thin, pale line. The clipboard in her left hand began to tremble. "Phil, pick up that cutter. Right now." A woman in a yellow sundress walked up to the conversation. She had a 6-year-old daughter on her hip. She had a 2-year-old son holding her left hand. She was not interested in the barricade. She was interested in her $320. "Excuse me, are you the lady who runs the festival?" Bridget did not look at her. "Yes." "Ma'am, I'd like to know what is going on with the road. We've been told to wait, but it's been almost an hour, and my kids are getting hot. Are we going to the dock, or are we getting refunded?" Bridget turned on her with the speed of a woman who had been waiting for an excuse. "Ma'am, your tickets are non-refundable. Please return to your vehicle and wait for further instruction." The mother in the yellow sundress took a step back. She had not been expecting that voice. The 2-year-old started to cry. The mother said, very quietly, what she wished she had said louder. "I'm just asking what's happening with my kids." Bridget reached out and took the mother's wrist. She tried to physically turn the woman back toward her vehicle. The mother in the yellow sundress had a 3rd child she had not introduced. Her name was Annika Borgen, Sergeant Annika Borgen. She had been planted in the line at 6 in the morning. The yellow sundress was on loan from her sister. 2 child actors had been recruited from the Sandpoint Children's Theater. A wireless body mic was taped to her sternum. Sergeant Borgen took her wrist back from Bridget Vanderhook's hand. She set the older child down. She unclipped her badge from inside the sundress. "Mrs. Vanderhook, you are under arrest for assault on a peace officer. That is in addition to everything else, which we will get to in a minute." Bridget's mouth opened. The first of the doors started slamming on the cul-de-sac. 2 unmarked Idaho State Police Tahoes turned the corner onto Bottle Bay Road from the south. 2 Bonner County Sheriff cruisers came up from the north. Lights bar, but no sirens. They came the way only a small county sheriff arrives when he has been waiting all summer to make exactly this stop. The FBI Suburban that had been hidden in the cedars rolled out of the South Fork. Marlon Faraday's Idaho Department of Land Service truck pulled in behind it. An ITD safety vehicle with rotating amber lights eased up to the head of the barricade. Behind all of them, Creme 2's satellite truck nosed out of Nora Esterhouse's hayshed and into the road. The 4 catering company employees, who had been quietly eating breakfast burritos in the Sprinter van, all stopped chewing at the same time. Sergeant Borgen had Bridget Vanderhook's wrist behind her back inside 30 seconds. The handcuffs went on without resistance. The 2 child actors from the Sandpoint Children's Theater were collected by their respective parents from a prearranged minivan 200 feet down the road. They had been very well paid to play one of the strangest roles of their early careers. Special Agent Tilford and Special Agent Lindstrom approached the Cadillac Escalade. Reese Vanderhook opened the door with the slow, defeated motion of a husband who had spent the last 40 minutes telling his wife to refund the guests. Tilford read him his federal Miranda rights in the patient voice of a man who had read those words more than 1,000 times. Marlon Faraday walked past Bridget toward the catering van. She held up an Idaho Department of Land's closure order for the Pond Array Pines dock. The order had been signed and stamped 12 hours earlier. It was effective immediately. Phil Hauser was sitting on the open tailgate of his truck, with his hands folded in his lap. A Bonner County deputy walked over to him. Phil said before the deputy spoke, "Sir, I never started cutting." The deputy nodded and asked Phil for his ID. Phil handed it over and offered a sworn statement on the spot. Quentin Halverson walked along the line of stopped vehicles, in his ITD uniform with his clipboard. He calmly informed the disappointed Sunset Sail Festival ticket holders that their event had been canceled by federal and state authorities. Contact information would be collected for refund processing. He spoke the way he had spoken to angry property owners during the Highway 95 expansion. That is to say, with the unflappable patience of a man who has explained too many road closures in his life to be rattled by another one. Sloan appeared at the South Fork of the road in her own car. She stepped out with a folder under each arm and walked toward the band trailer. The bewildered four-piece quartet was sitting on the bumper drinking warm bottled water. She introduced herself and gave each of them her business card. She assured them her firm would help them recover the $1,100 Bridget had paid them in advance. Pippa Whitford's Creme 2 cameras were rolling on every minute of it. I came down the logging road in my pickup truck very slowly. I parked behind the ITD service vehicle. I climbed out with my coffee in my left hand. I walked through the line of detained vehicles, past the Sprinter van, past the band trailer, past the Escalade where Reese Vanderhook was being placed in the back of an FBI Suburban, past the catering crew sitting on the gravel having their identifications run, past the small crowd of bewildered ticket holders being walked through their refund options. I stopped 6 feet from Bridget Vanderhook. She was already in the back of the Leeds State Police Tahoe, with the door open, her white linen dress streaked with orange paint and gravel dust. I did not raise my voice. "Mrs. Vanderhook, the road's been here since 1958. The barricade went in last night. Both of them belong to my family. Neither of them belongs to you." She looked at me with the expression of a woman who had finally understood. 6 summers too late, she realized I had been an Idaho Transportation Department engineer for 30 years. "You're him," she said. "You're the engineer." "Yes, ma'am. You let me run my tours for 3 summers. I let you write the case against yourself for 3 summers, Mrs. Vanderhook. There is a difference." She did not answer. The Tahoe door closed. I watched it pull away. Sergeant Borgen walked over to me in her sundress, badge clipped to her belt. She offered me her hand. "Mr. Brennan, welcome back to your road." The federal indictment for Bridget Vanderhook and her husband Reese came down 9 weeks later. Wire fraud, mail fraud, forgery of a recorded real estate document across state lines, tax evasion, conspiracy, operation of an unlicensed commercial enterprise on state-owned land, recording a fraudulent legal instrument under Idaho Code. The state and federal counts together totaled 53. Bridget pleaded out 3 months later. 48 months federal, 32 months state, served concurrently. Full restitution of $291,420 to the state of Idaho, the affected HOAs, and the customers who had paid for tours she had no legal right to sell. Permanent bar from any property management activity in Idaho or Washington. Reese pleaded the following month to wire fraud and tax evasion. 21 months federal. The Pond Array Pines Estates HOA dissolved its commercial division by membership vote 3 weeks after the arrest. The dock the state of Idaho had closed was eventually leased back to the HOA, this time for residents only. The brochure inserts in Pond Array Living were retracted. The magazine ran a full-page editorial apology in the September issue. The 2 other lake access HOAs Cole Beaufort had identified, on Lake Cocolala and Hayden Lake, entered settlement agreements with their original property owners within the year. Both replaced their property managers. The forged easements on both properties were vacated by their respective county courts. I received a personal civil settlement of $415,000 from the Vanderhook liquidation. less attorney fees and back tax obligations. I used every dollar of that settlement on one project. The Linnea Brennan Lakeshore Preservation Trust opened its first office in Sandpoint in May, on the second floor of the old Pond Array Hotel. The trust does three things. It holds protective conservation easements on private rural roads in northern Idaho that connect interior properties to lake access, so that no future Bridget Vanderhook can ever forge a way through them. It funds environmental cleanup and native habitat restoration along the eastern shore of Lake Pond Array. And it pays for 2 scholarships every year for graduating seniors from Bonner, Boundary, or Kootenai counties who are pursuing degrees in civil engineering, environmental science, or public lands management. Sloan comes out every Sunday now, not every other one. She brings my granddaughter Iris, who turned 2 last winter, and has decided that the llamas are the best thing about Idaho. Sloan's husband Russell repaints the fence with me every spring. We started something else too. The first Saturday of every September is now Brennan Tree Farm Day. We open the back paddock. We string up the white pine my father planted with paper lanterns. Adele Pruitt runs the cider press. Quentin Halverson runs the kid wagon ride along the safe stretch of Grandfather's Road. Nora Esterhaus brings 4 kinds of muffins. The pies, of course, come from Sloan. About 300 neighbors come through every September. Some are people I have known my whole life. Some are former tour customers who stayed in touch. Last September, a kid about 8 years old asked me if it was true I had once stopped 100 cars on my own driveway. I told him it was true. He asked if it was scary. I told him no, son. The scary part was the morning Bridget Vanderhook's first sign appeared at the head of my road, and I drove home and threw it in the bed of the truck without saying a word. Everything after that was just paperwork and patience. If this story made you angry, drop a comment below with your own HOA nightmare. I read every one. If it made you smile, share it with a neighbor who needs to hear that the quiet folks still have more tools than the loud folks. And if you enjoy this kind of story, slow-built, well-prepared, and finished by people who refuse to give up, hit subscribe. The next one is about an HOA Karen who told a deaf widower his house's visual fire alarms had to come down because they reflected light onto neighboring properties at night. The retired ADA compliance attorney 3 doors down had been quietly building her file for 6 months. I'll see you next week.